Because psychology is a science, information about human behavior is collected in systematic, objective, and quantifiable ways that can be replicated over time. There are several different methods for experimentation and research, but we're only going to focus on two for the purposes of the CLEP exam. We'll focus on experimentation and correlational studies. I'm going to begin by defining a few terms for you and then giving you one example to help understand the application of the terms. Within experimental research methodology, we are investigating a cause and effect relationship between two variables, or even more than two variables. When we are conducting experimental methodology, there are going to be two variables that we measure: the independent and dependent variables. The independent variable is the variable that is being manipulated. Essentially, it is the cause in the cause and effect relationship. The dependent variable is the variable that we are measuring for change. It's the effect. What is the result of the application of an independent variable? So to give you a brief example for these two terms, if I'm going to investigate the effects of an antidepressant medication on someone's depression, the variable being manipulated is whether or not I give them an antidepressant pill, or maybe I give them a sugar pill or a placebo. The dependent variable is the mood, the effect. Does the placebo or the antidepressant medication change their depression? Well, it depends on whether or not they receive treatment A or treatment B. Moving forward, within the experimental method, we have different groups within the design. An experimental group is that group which is exposed to the quote-unquote cause, or the group that is exposed to the independent variable. These are the individuals who might receive the antidepressant medication, and we would see the impact of that medication on the group. The second group is the control group. The control group is that group which is not exposed to the cause. They receive no treatment whatsoever, or perhaps a treatment that should have no effect. So in this example of examining depression and treatment, the experimental group would receive the medication or maybe even therapy, and the control group would be a group that receives no medication, no therapy whatsoever, but we are observing them as a control to see, was it the medication or the therapy that led to a reduction or in the depression, or was it simply other factors in people's environment? And the control group is what helps us achieve that understanding. Three other concepts that we need to understand in the experimental approach are the idea of a random assignment. If we are conducting an experiment, it is important that we don't know who we are going to apply the treatments to, but rather that we use a random method of applying, whether it be the antidepressant pill or the therapy or the no treatment. And we do it randomly. Because if we don't do it randomly, we might succumb to certain types of biases in how we're selecting who goes into each group. So for a brief example, if I want to know about the GPAs of a college or of a high school, if I'm going to just ask the students in the first row of a classroom, what is your GPA? I'm likely going to get high GPA values, as opposed to me going around and randomly asking people, because the front row of the class is generally the people who want to sit in the front, who want to work hard, and they are more likely to have high GPAs. Therefore, for me to adequately understand the question, I have to randomly distribute my treatment or randomly distribute my questions. Next, we're talking about blind and double-blind studies. In a research study, such as, let's say, the depression study, if I know, as the researcher, who I'm going to give the medication to, I might influence the patient themselves. If I say, here's a pill, I can't really tell you what pill it is, although I know which pill it is. They might read from my facial expressions or my body language which medication they are getting, and that will affect the study. So both myself as the experimenter and the person receiving the medication are blind. We refer to this as the double-blind study, where neither party knows what they are receiving. And this leads to a more pure research study. Finally, as I referred to earlier, a placebo is a sugar pill, a pill that has just sugar inside of it, but people might think has a medication. And when I administer a placebo, it might lead to a person reacting as if it were the medication. This is a very powerful effect, and it's referred to as the placebo effect. When a person receives a benign product or a benign treatment tool, and yet they have a response to the treatment, we know that it wasn't actually the medication, but perhaps just the sheer belief that I'm taking a medicine that changes people's state of mind. We now turn to a few other research methods. From the clinical realm, we talk about case studies, which are individual or single cases of studying a behavior or a condition or an emotion, such as the technique used by Sigmund Freud, who we read about earlier in the chapters. And Freud used this method to develop the psychoanalytic theory. It has its advantages in that we get deep into understanding an individual, and it has its disadvantages because it is very hard to apply our understandings from a single case into a broader population. Next, we have the method of naturalistic observation. In this method, we observe the behaviors of our subjects in a naturalistic environment. So I might sit in a classroom and observe the interactions of the students with their teacher. I might go to a remote jungle and observe from a distance the behaviors of the animals in order for me to study and understand animal behavior. Next, we have the method of clinical interviews, where I might sit and interview someone one-on-one and get deep information about the person's clinical presentation. It is very important in these approaches for me to understand that if I sit with one person and then another clinician sits with that same individual, we may get very different information. And so we have to be aware that clinical interviews, as all of the other approaches, have their advantages as well as their disadvantages. Let's move forward to the last of the methodologies, the correlational method. In this method, we are observing how two variables relate to each other, but we are not manipulating either of these variables. Earlier, I spoke to you about using a research study for understanding depression, and I might manipulate our understanding by giving an antidepressant medication or a sugar pill. I, as the experimenter, am manipulating that variable. But in correlation, we're merely observing and taking an accounting of what happens without manipulating. So in this case, I might observe the correlation between mood and the amount of exams that you're studying for. If you're studying for 5 exams versus 10 exams, does that affect your mood? It's a correlation or a connection between two variables. And again, what's very important to understand is that there is no cause and effect that we're measuring here, only a relationship. Within correlations, we have a mathematical way of representing the connection or the relationship between variables. We're looking for a correlation coefficient, which is a measurement of relationship from a -0 to a positive, from a -1.0 to neutral to a positive 1.0. Okay? And we can see here that in a positive correlation in this domain here, two variables might be related to each other and they move in the same direction. So that as you receive one variable, the other variable also receives the positive impact. So, for example, if I press my foot on the gas of a car, the car will go faster. As I increase the pressure on the pedal, the car will go faster. As one goes up, the other variable goes up. And as well, if I decrease the application of one variable, there's a decrease in reaction as well. So the less time I spend studying, the lower my grade will be. Less time studying equals a reduction in my grade. Okay, as one goes down, the other one goes down. A negative correlation is different in that as one variable increases, the other decreases. So I might say in this case, the more exercise, or the more time I spend exercising, the lower my weight might be. As one increases, the other variable decreases. This is a negative correlation. Finally, we also talk about surveys, which are self-reported measurements that I administer and answer on my own. And surveys are very effective because I can reach a large population of people, but their downside is that they're subject to my own bias and that I might not report honestly on this survey. This about covers it for various research methods that we will cover for the CLEP exam.